It is now a done deal, or is it? The president of Kenya announcing to a jubilant house the country is done with Adani. All this because a court in a city 11,841 kilometers away indicted one Gautam Adani and his associates for alleged fraud. And this week, even as the Catholic Church got some bashing from government, they got some backing from the Anglican Church, who doubled down on the tongue lashing, telling the government to apply the same gusto it had when responding to the Catholic Church on fixing the country's problems. It would seem the true state of the nation this year has come from the pulpit and not from Parliament. On Jamila's memo tonight, read the Haiti tea leaves. On Sam Sense, don't be fooled by the Pyrrhic victory. Careful not to win the battle and lose the war. Stay vigilant. And on My Take, is Kenya fast becoming an abductor's paradise? The News Gang is here.
Both are the aviation and energy sectors.
I have directed agencies within the Ministry of Transport and the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum to immediately cancel the ongoing procurement process for JKIA expansion public-private partnership transaction, as well as the recently concluded Ketrago transmission in public partnership.
Welcome to News Gang. The hashtag is News Gang at Citizen TV Kenya and at our handles Jamila, Sam. Welcome to the program for something that was said in Parliament that many people may have just almost missed, were it not for the rousing, applause that got people's attention that, hey, something interesting has been said. Sam, you have covered Adani and their forays into the country since the beginning. First with JKIA, then Ketrago. You've had interviews on it, interviewing perhaps almost all of the stakeholders and duty bearers on this one.
Right.
So let's just talk about, first of all, what happened in Parliament today at the State of the Nation. An interesting statement from the President.
Indeed it is, because and I think he caught so many off guard. Nobody thought it would get to that point. And I also think the events of the morning, how it was, and receiving reports from the US may have actually contributed to that. I would be curious to find out whether the original statement that the president was to read actually had this decision that the Adani deal was going to be cancelled. But so be it. It has happened. And this has been the month, and I think starting October, this is when we've been hearing that the Adani Energies have sealed the deal to build transmission lines for Ketrago, costing some 95.6 billion shillings. And of course, a lot of questions were being asked. And you'll recall that initially, even when we were talking about the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport expansion program that was costing 2 billion shillings, it was not information that was very much available. In fact, I think it is the Prime Cabinet Secretary and former acting Cabinet Secretary for all departments who revealed this when he appeared before Parliament.
And current acting Interior Minister.
Yeah, he's also acting Interior and Gender
yes,
Affairs
that's
as well.
Right. Yeah.
So when he appeared before Parliament, and he was now responding to questions of the members of Parliament asking about the particular one, and he detailed about 2 billion shillings, and he was even defending it. He even issued a statement thereafter explaining that this has to be the only way, because we do not have the space to wiggle through our current budget and the resources that we have. Therefore, 2 billion shillings converting to 260 billion shillings could only come from a private partnership arrangement. Public-private partnership, yes, $2 billion, converted to 260 billion shillings. And I remember us having that conversation that, is this the only way out? Until eventually now people started paying attention to who is this Adani, and getting to understand even the timelines, how interesting they were, that at a time that Kenya Airports Authority had been given advisory by ALG firm telling them that we think that public-private partnership is a good way to go. But we do not think that going it through the concession that we're hearing about is the right way, because they are preferring that an open tender system is the widely accepted mode of procurement. Even them saying that it is the default route that should be followed under the PPP Act. But now here we are. A lot of questions were asked. A lot of people appeared before Parliament, the Kenya Ports Authority themselves, and we know the sort of meetings that have been going on from the board, both in Kenya to India to different parts of the world, the pressure that has come from people close to the high office, them pushing that this has to be concluded as fast as possible. By the time we were speaking to the Cabinet Secretary on the 12th of September, Davis Chirchir told us that they had gone through 13 stages out of 20.
Yeah, it's pretty fast.
It is up until a court order was given stopping the Adani deal on JKIA that process was stopped. For the Ketraco one, it was already signed, but now stopped
by the courts. And you have to wonder if the court case, for instance, regarding JKIA had not come through. They're already at 13 out of 20 steps. Right. That deal may have eventually been signed. But I mean, I think the big argument about the public-private partnerships deal was what the government kept saying is that, okay, you don't want to be taxed. You also don't want us to borrow. So what are the avenues that we have left over this matter? And all of these were in the pipeline. Today stopped. But, Jamila, how did we get here? Because it's interesting what Sam has said about whether this was probably part of the speech to begin with. Because remember, these indictments out of New York came out late last night, early, I think in the middle of the night for us here. So you have to wonder whether this was part of it or whether it was now, inserted at the last minute. But maybe for us to understand how the president got to announcing the cancellation of the deals, this all started, interestingly, or was prompted by events in New York.
Yvonne, in fact, as you talk about whether the speech was changed or not, maybe we should listen to, Roba, if you can try and get it for me, what Energy CSO and I said this morning on the same deal, because we assumed when he was speaking in the morning, that was after the Adani group was, and Adani, Gautam Adani and 7 other people were indicted, we assume that is what the government's voice is, a reaction to this whole thing. So let's listen to CS Wandai, and then we can continue.
Would these emerging reports in any way affect the delivery of this project? We can't tell. Why? Because they aren't related to this project. We can't even vote for their veracity from where we sit. And therefore we'll be engaging in speculation, Honorable Chair. The second limb of that question is, could these bribery or corruption claims have a bearing on our own process? To my knowledge, Honorable Chair, there has been no case of corruption or bribery insofar as this PIP of Adani Energy Solutions is concerned, up to now, up to this very moment.
Of course, it is going to have an effect on the deal that we have signed with Ketraco. Of course, it matters because the charges that were brought against Gautam Adani and the other executives in New York were not anything small. These were huge allegations that, in fact, by the time the indictment was being announced, this was investigations that had taken years. Yeah. In fact, the 54-page indictment talked about how between 2020 and 2024, the defendants had agreed to pay bribes, because this whole thing is about agreeing to pay bribes for contracts that would generate them more than $2 billion in profits. Yeah. This was fraud. This was bribery. This was because of those are the project that they were bidding for, that they wanted, the bribes that they were offering Indian government officials, was for plans to develop a major solar power plant in India. Yeah. So here you go, the Department of Justice doing its investigations against Gautam Adani, who is a key ally of the current Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and 7 others, including one of his nephews, Sagar Adani. They promised more than $250 million in bribes, as I say, to the Indian government to secure this contract. What is the impact of that? Because remember, Yvonne, this is not the first time that we are hearing anything against the Adanis. Yeah. Just last year, a U.S. company accused the same Adani group of stock manipulation and accounting fraud. Yeah. And this was actually felt because it was something that affected their stocks back then.
Yes.
And that has happened even today, because about 20% of the stocks now have gone down after this. This is a they're saying it wiped out just under $30 billion in total market value of Adani just after the announcement today. And we had heard about what had happened a year ago. So there was all these murmurs about what happened even in Bangladesh. And it still went ahead, even after the JKIA deal, to sign the Katrako one. Someone says, remember Yvonne tuliambwa amkeni airport yenu inauzwa? That was a post by Nelson Amenya sometime, I think June, July, after the Gen Z protests, during the height of it, and they're thinking, who would actually want to sell our airport? And then this whole thing starts there, denials and counter denials. Kuna deal ya Adani hakuna. Iko kitu hakuna, until we had Prime Cabinet Secretary Musalia Mudavadi take out, I think, an ad in the paper, and then of course the statement that you talk about, because that was the only way we were going to find out that there was actually such a deal in the offing, because ilifichuliwa na mtu mahali, and then the first reaction is deny, until you have no other option but to actually kubali that it's actually on. Were it not for the courts, I don't know how far would have been in this deal, because unlike what the CS is saying, it actually has an effect when Adani is being indicted for bribery and fraud.
So let's state on the outset that these are indictments. These are charges. So they have not been convicted yet. They are innocent until proven guilty. All of those in that case. Jamila, you mentioned that Hindenburg research that talked about stock manipulation, accounting fraud. That already was in 2023. This was long before we even got involved with Adani, or long before that name even became infamous in this part of the world, let alone in this country. If the government says they did due diligence, if you take a look at just the effects that research had on them, their share prices fell. That meant investors were jittery. In fact, at some point, they had to do a secondary share sale to fund their projects and pay some of their debts that they owed at the time. And they were unable to raise funds using collateral, because their stocks and shares are used as collateral to be able to borrow, to be able to fund some of their major projects that they have. In fact, 2 big banks actually stopped accepting Adani bonds. So this was on that research that you talked about to begin with. And it took them a while to be able to get over these. They called those allegations malicious and baseless. And then comes this New York indictment, and we understand they've been investigating them since 2022. Now, many would ask, because part of the allegations are that they were bribing $265 million to secure solar energy projects in India. But why would the US be involved? Well, particularly because it was some American investors who were involved, and they're alleging a fraud scheme, which is obtaining money by false and misleading statements from American investors. And this is how then the US came in. And they're usually, pay attention to what they call the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is any sort of corruption that involves American investors, either by omission, commission, or either on their part or somebody else. So this is how then it comes on. But this is the effect of it, right now. Take a look at the fact that this is a cross-border allegation, of their involvement in that. Will it now start to cast light on other cross-border deals that they have been engaging in, including, the ones in Kenya, JKIA and Ketrako? The effect of this: investor confidence goes down, share price goes down. It's going to be harder for them to raise capital, meaning their ability to raise funds to fund all of their projects. Remember, because it is a PIP project, they put in their money first. So, I think even on that basis alone, I found it interesting that the CS for Energy would be saying very categorically, when that indictment had just been done a couple of hours before, to say it won't affect us. Maybe to say, we are thinking, we are consulting with our Attorney General, with other legal minds, and we'll get back to you. As you know, this indictment was only a few hours ago. We're seeking the right advice, but to be so categorical about that. But here's the kicker for me. It takes an indictment in New York for the president to then say that we're canceling this deal. It takes that indictment for even the Energy Ministry to start to think twice. I find the Energy Minister's statements very interesting, because even if he was saying, we will go ahead with this deal, there was no way he was going to go ahead with the deal, because in Kenya, the High Court had already issued conservatory orders barring government from implementing that deal between Adani and Ketraco. So, Mr. Energy Minister, there is no way you are going on ahead with this deal, whether New York indictment was here or not. Right. The court stopped the two entities, that's Ketraco and Adani, from entering into any new agreements or even furthering any existing ones, pending determination of the case. So the courts in Kenya make some determination, at least on a conservatory basis. That's not enough to stop the government in its tracks. It takes an indictment in a faraway land for us to take this seriously. And remember, some of the questions that had been raised against this case, which is yet to be determined, as is the one in New York, by the way. LSK said the agreement was tainted with secrecy. There was no public participation. Many questioned, in fact, the process of this. Who initiated it? Mm-hmm. Remember the narrative that Adani is the one that came to us and said, we've noticed you've got issues at your airport and we think we can fix them. The questions about whether the process was indeed competitively done or not for something that is as strategic as your national airport, one would imagine that you would go out into the market and seek the best deal possible. So open up the tender, get as many as possible, get it competitively done, make a decision based on all of those. And so even as the president said today that they would be looking forward to getting this deal done because it is important, the big question now is the process going to be done differently going forward? Are we going to see some more competitive bidding and not some company that we hear about somewhere in India or any other part of the world that suddenly just, drops a pin on the map and says, oh, let's go to Kenya and let's find the airport has issues. Oh, they have some issues with their transmission. We can help with that and enhance their transmission of electricity around the country. You see, those were some of the questions that were raised, and those questions were being raised locally by Kenyans, by legal, and yet it's only when maybe some questions are raised somewhere else
as Gituku
that the president is moved.
Even as Gituku comes in, I think we need to look at something that was said by the Deputy Assistant AG in the US. She's called Lisa Miller, and I quote, she said, this indictment alleges schemes to pay over $250 million USD in bribes to Indian government officials to lie to investors and banks, to raise billions of dollars and to obstruct justice. Okay? I have a question. What would it have cost per kilometer for the Ketraco deal? Because kuna kitu hapa.
Oh, okay. Let me give you an example, by the way. According to the charges, apparently that $265 million bribe, allegedly to secure solar energy contracts, were actually calculated per megawatt.
Oh, wow.
$30,000 per megawatt was how they arrived at the total figure of $265 million US dollars, allegedly.
And some of
they were very clever about it, by the way. They had spreadsheets of it. They were calling. They had code words. They were using code communications. And then they also eventually disguised it as development fees. But you see, these are people who sat down, if this is to be believed, and this is a case, by the way, that could take a while, right. Which is why I found, some of those categorical statements. So you have the CS for Energy saying we're going on. Also, do they speak in government? Because it was in the morning, and by 3 o'clock, the president said no deal.
Even though to cut the cabinet secretary some slack, if the president decides to cancel it, he'll announce it when he wants.
Fair enough.
He'll not call the cabinet secretary and tell him, don't go to the session in the House because I'm just about to change the reason why you're appearing there.
Fair enough.
But never mind. So it happened, and he has now to change his stand and how he's going to explain this particular matter. But as you say, about $32 billion that may have been used to bribe the people that were in India. And I see the hesitance of the cabinet secretary. I'm just wondering, because we have tried to access the deal that the Kenya Electricity Transmission Company signed with Adani Energy, so we haven't found it. What is in the exit clause? How much is it going to cost the country? Because once you sign a deal, and you have seen previously, when there was an arrangement between the government of Kenya and some Chinese companies to build a greenfield terminal of the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, I think immediately we lost about 4.7 billion shillings, which had been invested in the program. When this matter was eventually resolved by the government of President William Ruto, some further 600 million shillings was paid for the arbitration after the agreement, after the different parties came to an agreement. So every project that has been cancelled, if you're talking about Arol and Kimorel, which was again cancelled by President Uhuru Kenyatta on different grounds, including that one of them was not economically viable, it was not feasible, the other one needed to be reduced in stage, I think, by half. It comes at a cost because the government has already committed to certain conditions. If any party gets out of that deal, just like in employment, if you are employed by a certain company and your contract is cut or you leave without giving notice, there are severance issues that have to be taken into consideration. So we need to know, after getting out of this deal with Adani Energies, 95.6 billion shillings that was supposed to go into it, what are we going to pay for? Then as you're talking about this particular question and the questionable character of Adani and how they were doing their business, because remember, as we said, they presented a PIP, what do you call that? The privately initiated proposal to Kenya Airports Authority ahead of time, even before the Kenya Airports Authority briefed the cabinet on what their strategic planning was, which was eventually approved by cabinet on June 11th. But the PIP was received way back, I think it was February or March, at which time ALG had already advised against a 30-year concession. Then again, you find that as we are inching closer and closer to conclusion of that particular program, which was actually expedited quite fast, unlike usual, you'll find that Adani was now registering different companies across the globe. For instance, on 7th of August, which is this year, just about 3 months or so ago, the registered in Abu Dhabi Global Airports Operator LLC Abu Dhabi, which was supposed to be the arm of Adani that goes ahead to invest in global or in the international space to build airports. Then you find that, of course, the ownership there, you find it's in equivalence of 1.75 million shillings. And then again, you find that on 30th of August 2024, Airports Infrastructure PLC was registered in Kenya, which was now supposed to be the local arm of this particular company registered in Abu Dhabi, which is the international arm of Adani Group, which is registered in Abu Dhabi. And all this information, I mean, in India rather, and all this information was presented to the stock exchange agency in India. So you find that how this was being done, registering a company because you have a job to do. And you've seen this even in other programs. If you're talking about even what is happening with the Social Health Authority, the procurement of the 104 billion shilling technological system. Some of the firms that are involved are registered just recently in Abu Dhabi again. So still there are questions to be asked. And even though the president has made this decision, the questions do not go away because there has to be accountability. There are officials who work for the government that piled pressure on people that were negotiating this particular deal on Adani. And there are people who pressured the Kenya Airports Authority, and the officials of Kenya Airports Authority appeared before Parliament. At some point, they were unable to answer questions because there was a lot of pressure coming from certain quarters. And the president spoke, and I want to quote without...
we actually have the soundbite.
Getting it wrong. Do you have the one that he was talking about, I'm not a madman? Yeah, because he said,
well, yes.
I have seen people saying William Ruto wants to sell the airport. Am I a madman? How do you sell a strategic national asset? You have to be insane. And indeed, now we see he has taken a decision because that deal of 30 years, in as much as it was for a period of time, it was a concession for a period of time and then it's handed over to the country. If you look at the cost versus the benefit, it was tilting against the country.
Let's listen to the defense of that, and that came from quite a few quarters. This happened somewhere between October and just a couple of weeks ago.
The Adani Group are investing in the transmission line. Their money, 95 billion. We would have otherwise gone to borrow that money, burden the people of Kenya. This is now a private sector investment. The same way Keshan here is a private sector investment. The same way Sosian is a private sector investment. We will pay for that transmission line using a wheeling charge that has been negotiated.
We all have misgivings about how the current proposed PPPs concerning the JKIA and power distribution have been processed, which has resulted in a raging debate over the involvement of the Indian firm in the airport and energy sector projects. Unfortunately, these misgivings have also resulted in a lot of misinformation regarding the investors who have made the PPP's proposals.
Adani has not been debarred by any country. There has not been engagement in acts of corruption that we so far found it on due diligence. Is not insolvent, is tax compliant in all jurisdictions in which it has local tax presence.
Now, Yvonne, looking at that, we were told that due diligence was being done. By the time they were at stage 13 out of 20, due diligence was being done. I'm just wondering, with all the noise that Kenyans were making, what does due diligence mean? If we have to wait until the US has made a decision to charge, what is due diligence? If this particular company, they had questionable character in different parts of the world, what is due diligence? And you see, when Kenyans raise questions, the more reason why the proper due diligence has to be done. Because even the PPP Act itself, it talks about people should not have been engaged. There's a period of time they say they should not have been engaged. I don't know if you have that. Should not have been engaged in some corruption sort of scandals or investigations. But here we are. I think the cure in future, because PPP Act is law in Kenya, the cure has to be proper work being done, but also building information when Kenyans ask for it.
You know, that clause that you refer to, which is why even as we ask for the CS Energy to be cut some slack based on his statement today, maybe perhaps consult the law, the Public Private Partnerships Act, Section 41 says, and I quote, "Before commencing an evaluation of a privately initiated proposal, conduct due diligence to confirm that the private party," Section B says, "is not corrupt, has not engaged in acts of corruption, and," here's the clincher, "has not been sued or convicted on accounts of acts of corruption." Now, has not been sued. They've just been sued this morning, for that in New York. So based on that alone, perhaps the CS may well have consulted the law before saying, fine, there may have been no allegations here, but the very law itself says that any private party that has been sued in any other jurisdiction, this must be considered before entering the evaluation. And so for me, it's not whether the president chose to change his mind after or not, but it would just be to be less categorical on statements like these, to consult and to think a little bit more, take a look at the laws, speak about it before saying we're still going full steam ahead. And that's something that you see a lot with this one. And I think just my final thing on that one is, I don't like that we're focusing so much on what's happening in New York, as important as it is. But for us to, and at least for this to happen at that executive level, what are we saying about the Kenyan courts? Is there no respect for Kenyan courts when they put a halt to certain processes? By the way, it was not just with Ketraco, but it was with the JKIA Adani deal as well. These matters are in court, and there are injunctions of it. So, between the U.S. District Court for Eastern District of New York and the High Court of Kenya, which one is most important in how we make decisions in this country is the question.
But you're leaving out something, because the president says, based on new information provided by our investigative agencies.
Oh, you said that in his statement today.
So I'm just curious,
which information is this?
Investigation agencies are this that actually brought us this information? Is it DCI? Is it EACC? But we know that the Directorate on Public-Private Partnership was already doing this work, and they had already given a lot of ticks. So DCI was able to...
Or is it the U.S. District Court?
I think we need to remember that right now in Kenya, it's a moment of victory for those who are against it.
Yeah.
And two, we are here because Americans did it on their own over something very different, not anything that has anything to do with us. And three, transparency and accountability, I think, in my opinion, has risen in this country. Whether it's because people are more woke, whether it's social media, or whether we're making a lot of noise over issues and we have suspicion, as we are being forced to be suspicious of everything, whether transparent or not, there's a lot of accountability and transparency that has risen, I think, among Kenyans. And we need to stop mistaking corruption for deals and sanitizing fraud as enterprise.
As enterprise. Let's take a break. When we come back, it's the state of the nation from the pulpit, maybe from Parliament. We'll be right back.